Welcome back to another episode of Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglavia. Be flying solo again. Weather's nice, warm. Hopefully everybody is enjoying their summer. Spent a little bit of time at the Haverhill Fair last weekend. It was nice. Hope everybody who lives near there had a chance to go check it out. I think you would have enjoyed it. I want to get right into, hopefully I'm going to have time to cover three topics here. And they're all three are very important, and I hope those of you in the listening audience will think that they're equally as important as I do. First one is an article out of Vermont Digger. Applications open for nearly $68 million in federal flood recovery funding for Vermont. Let's see. This is a story for America Corp member Carly Berlin. Let's see, for a partnership through Vermont Digger and Vermont Public Community, and it is dated July 24. Communities impacted by the devastating floods that swept through Vermont in July 2023 can now apply for a cut of long-term federal disaster aid. State officials have opened the application process for nearly $68 million in federal recovery money allocated to the state late last year. Officials hope to funnel the majority of the funding toward housing development outside of flood-prone areas. Now, I want to stop and break from the article for a second, because if part of the reason, and I'm not saying all of it, but part of the reason is because of infrastructure that was undersized, just say, like, for instance, culverts in some areas where there has already been building, and the culverts were never upsized because maybe there's a community that was tight on money and they were watching their budget. Or there were bridges that needed to be raised at a higher level because they were at risk of flood. Why are we going to be taking a large portion of this and putting it toward housing instead of infrastructure that obviously failed, that caused a lot of the flooding? So let me get a little bit deeper into this and we'll talk a little bit more. Quote, "We recognize that housing is a crisis across the whole state and especially in these flood areas," said Nate Formulari, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is administrating the block grants. Quote, "If future storms are to come, we need to have places to put people," end quote. And I agree with Nate there. A state analysis found that Vermont has over $350 million in unmet flood recovery needs tied to the 2023 storm alone, with the bulk of that need stemming from costly damage to public infrastructure like power, wastewater, and transportation systems. But the state officials plan to direct more than 60% of the federal disaster aid, over $41 million, toward housing development. Now, I want to break from the article again. Why are we doing 60% of the federal disaster aid toward housing? And I know, ladies and gentlemen, we talk on this show numerous times about the lack of the serious deficit for housing. But if we don't have the infrastructure, why are we putting the cart before the horse here? If we need to do infrastructure repair, we have in the town and city of Barre, we have infrastructure that hasn't been cleaned out in a very, very long time prior to these floods that needs to be cleaned out. Maybe it needs to be opened up. Maybe it needs to be upsized. So are we saying that housing is going to be prioritized over some of the infrastructure that is necessary for the housing that we apparently need? So if I was the one deciding percentage-wise what went where, 60% of that federal aid would be going toward the infrastructure repairs that are desperately needed. Let's see, toward infrastructure like power, wastewater, and transportation systems. Backtracking a little bit more, wasn't there an article I believe I read somewhere, I believe it was possibly on Vermont Daily Chronicle, where there was a leaky valve at a wastewater treatment plant that caused beaches somewhere, I believe in Chittenden County, to be closed? Well, if we are dependent on a recreation economy in the Lake Champlain area, why are we not concentrating on preventing leaky valves and overflows from stormwater and stuff like that? So I'm not sure the percentage of disaster relief going to the housing versus fixing infrastructure and opening up infrastructure and repairing infrastructure. We talked about on this show how many of the state's bridges are in need of repair and how old they are. Have people thought about this with respect to the $41 million or more? Excuse me. Yeah. Let's see. What have we got? $68 million. I'm sorry. $41 million going toward housing development. So I don't know that the percentages in my mind are correct here. Ask why officials opted to channel much of this funding toward housing, specifically formulary, and I apologize if I mispronounced the name, emphasized the state of Vermont's extraordinarily tight housing market. And I understand, Nate, but if we don't fix the infrastructure, are we going to be putting houses at risk and the infrastructure to get to the houses at risk? The loss of homes to flood damage and property buyouts. The pot of money available to the state pales in the face of overall need. And I agree there. I definitely agree there. Vermont's long-term disaster recovery funding. Federal rules require that the majority of Vermont's 2023 flood recovery grant go to projects in Lamoille and Washington counties. State officials plan to direct more than half of the funds to housing development. There is a need to replenish some of these housing options in these communities that are getting flooded year after year. I go back. If we have infrastructure issues, maybe that's the priority that we need to take into consideration. We know, ladies and gentlemen, over years, there have been more and more houses built. There's more traffic on the roads. Have the bridges and the culvert pipes been upsized? I noticed in the towns of both, or cities of both Barry and Montpelier, where I travel, some of them have been after the floods. But what about the smaller tributaries that dump into the larger ones that run along the routes going, the main routes going right through Barry and Montpelier? So we need to be measured in our spending here, and I'm very, very concerned, and I haven't seen the whole plan, but I'm very, very concerned that not spending enough on the infrastructure is going to put more people at risk instead of taking away the risk for more people. The feds rules dictate that the majority of the disaster funding must flow to Lamoille and Washington counties, which were both particularly hard hit by the flooding 2 years ago. State officials have earmarked the remaining funds for unmet flood recovery needs in Caledonia, Orleans, Rutland, Windham, and Windsor counties. The funding must primarily benefit low and moderate income residents. What about the people who were affected by this flooding who were not low and moderate income? They still had maybe housing and infrastructure that were lost. So this is a bit concerning. Like I said, I don't have all of the details on where all of the money is. I know there apparently was a meeting not too long ago, a very short time ago about this. I did not know of the meeting, but it's one of those meetings I wish I was actually at so I could hear more about what's going on. Let's see, back to the article. This type of federal funding isn't a given after a disaster strikes. Unlike immediate relief funds from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which can start flowing right after the president declares a disaster, Congress has to take action to appropriate more flexible long-range funds. The money allocated to Vermont came out of a disaster aid package that federal lawmakers passed in December. This form of disaster aid also offers a rare opportunity to build new housing outside of the floodplain. While FEMA's aid programs generally tie a homeowner to rebuilding on the site of their damaged home, for instance, or buy them out with a no guarantee of available home to move into, these more flexible funds can allow a community to create homes where they didn't exist before. I like this part of it, but I'm very concerned about the infrastructure, both highways, bridges, culverts, that are already existing. That did we clean them out? Do we have a need to upsize culverts, for example? Do we have the need to make bridges, replace bridges and make them taller so that flooding will not be caused by a bridge that doesn't have enough clearance? And we saw that in Barry, and I'm sure it happened in Montpelier as well. Let's see. Barry City, which has been hit repeatedly by major floods in recent years, has a long list of housing projects it's considering and is as it puts together an application for the disaster funding, said City Manager Nicholas Storella Castro. One major priority is financing the infrastructure for new homes at the proposed Prospect Heights development, an undeveloped site near the city's downtown. The city also wants to jumpstart the revitalization of the flood-prone North End neighborhood, using some of the funding to build affordable homes at a park outside the floodplain, Storella Castro said. Redeveloping a long vacant downtown building and funding more home elevations are also on the list, he said. Between all of these projects, the city plans to apply for around $30 million from the federal funding pot as Barry loses dozens of homes and property tax revenue to buyout takers and lingering flood damage. The funding could make a meaningful difference, Storella Castro said. That would be a big step forward, not just to address the housing crunch, but to help the city's tax base, he said. So, if we don't want, I just keep coming back, ladies and gentlemen, if we don't want to see this happen again, are we going to be concentrating enough, and I don't have enough detail right now, but will we be concentrating enough on making sure that the infrastructure we have can handle a 2 or 3 or 5 inch rainfall without winding up having new housing in a flood situation as well? We don't want to have repeats of this, is all I'm saying. And I hope this is in the back of the officials who are actually doing some planning on how to actually most effectively spend this money. State officials are asking municipalities and local organizations interested in a shot at the funding to submit pre-applications by August 5th, with full applications due in late September. A citizen board will review them according to a rubric and make recommendations to Lindsay Curl, Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and Governor Phil Scott, who will have a final say on application decisions. The state hopes to begin awarding funding before the end of 2025. So this, ladies and gentlemen, apparently there are plans to actually get this in the works very quickly, which I hope works. But I would like to see that there are enough funds to deal with the infrastructure that obviously was part of the problem with respect to the rainfall that we got, not just in the first flood, but in the second flood as well. Talked to a property owner just today who said there are some areas where flooding or debris blocking infrastructure from the first flood remained, and when the second flood hit, it became a problem again. So these are some of the things that I hope are being thought of with respect to getting some of this FEMA money. I'm glad it's there. I just hope it is spent in the best, wisest possible way. So we're coming up on a break here. I've got 2 more subjects I want to get into, so when we get back, we'll talk about one of the other 2. You're listening to Right Side Up.
New Hampshire Republican Governor Kelly Ayotte has been making a lot of noise about how she's funding education. The Republican budget she just signed provides more money for education than ever before. She even bragged the other day that New Hampshire is top 10 in the country when it comes to funding our children's education, as if giving money to school systems has anything to do with learning. If you look at the math, and if you got schooled in New Hampshire, the odds are good it's not your best subject. It's the exact opposite. The more money we throw at schools, the less kids learn. We're committed to wasting money on an experiment that failed, unless wasting money to drive parents to homeschool their kids was the goal. We prefer to pick on Democrats, lower hanging fruit and all that, but our rhetorical woodshed doesn't discriminate. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you.
You're listening to Right Side Up. My name is Mike Taglavia. We were just talking about federal FEMA money coming to the state to the tune of $68 million. So hopefully that will help get some people and infrastructure made whole after some of the floods in the recent past. But I want to talk about another program and a lot of money again, and wondering if it's money spent in the right place. This is from FYIVT.com, and this says admin, but Dave Sulia is FYIVT.com, so I want to give credit where credit is due. This article is dated July 20th. How Vermont's SNAP program spends $155 million each year. Okay, so getting right into it. Do you remember starting your day with a bowl of sugary cereal only to fight off sleep by mid-morning? Did a school lunch of pizza, fries, and chocolate milk leave you groggy through the afternoon? And as an adult, have you felt the same post-lunch slump, a wave of drowsiness and fog that makes focusing nearly impossible? This cycle of sugary spikes and crashes isn't just anecdotal. Nutrition researchers describe it as postprandial hyperglycemia, a sharp rise in blood sugar after carbohydrate-heavy meals, triggering insulin surges that often lead to fatigue and difficulty concentrating. For tens of thousands of Vermonters relying on food assistance, this pattern may be built into the very system meant to help them. Annually, Vermont's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, known locally as Three Squares Vermont, distributes nearly $155 million to 65,000 people. The payments are funded entirely by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, although Vermont shares in the program's administrative costs, typically covering around half of the expenses involved in eligibility, EBT support, and outreach. Federal data shows less than 36% of those benefits were spent on nutrient-dense foods like meat, dairy, and non-starchy vegetables. The majority funded refined grains, sweetened beverages, and ultra-processed snacks. And this is, the article questions, is it a diet that sets up crashes? A USDA study of national SNAP purchases offers a detailed picture. Meat, poultry, and seafood, 19.2%. Dairy products, 11.7%. Non-starchy vegetables, 4.3%. Starches, bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, etc., 40.6%. Sweetened beverages and snacks, 17.1%. Now, the article goes on. Applied to Vermont, these proportions translate to roughly $63 million on starches, $26.4 million on sugary drinks and snacks, $11 million on fruits, and in parentheses, sugar heavy, $29.8 million on meat and seafood, $18.1 million on dairy, $6.7 million on non-starchy vegetables. Now, I want to break from the article for a second, ladies and gentlemen. If we, as a state, and as a legislature, I know when we had legislation that was looking to help preserve our farming and our agriculture in this state, I was always happy. But if we're actually really putting our money where our mouths are, then why are we spending only $29.8 million on meat and seafood for this program and $63 million on starches? We're doing it a little upside down, if you ask me. We've only got $18.1 million on dairy. Well, we have dairy farms. If we want to keep dairy farms here, why are we not taking some of that $63 million spent on starches and pumping it into the $18.1 million on dairy to actually do two things? We're going to be feeding the kids who need to be fed, and we're going to be keeping our own local farmers in business. Makes sense to me. How about you? This means, getting back to the article, this means more than $100 million, nearly two-thirds of Vermont SNAP benefits, supports foods known to spike blood sugar and drive energy crashes. That's not boding well for our kids being able to pay attention after our lunch and snack time. Okay, next segment of this says, built on calories, not nutrition. SNAP was created in 1964 to fight hunger by increasing access to calories, but critics argue it has not kept pace with nutrition science. Research shows SNAP participants often consume more calories than non-recipients, but their diets are higher in carbohydrates, sugar, and sodium, raising concerns about diet quality and long-term health outcomes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a state where health care costs are skyrocketing. They're some of the highest in the country. So if we can actually modify this SNAP budget or this SNAP dietary program, can't we actually help our kids improve their attention spans and their energy levels after mealtime and make them healthier at the same time? Imagine that. So let me get back to this. Federal commodity programs like the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TEFAP, also reinforce this focus, supplying food banks with bulk items such as flour, rice, pasta, and potatoes, alongside smaller quantities of canned meats and powdered milk. While calorie-dense and shelf-stable, these foods can contribute to the very cycle of energy highs and lows that public health experts warn undermines cognitive performance, work productivity, and overall well-being. Health impacts of food aid patterns. Vermont's obesity rate stands at approximately 29%, and 9% of adults are diagnosed with diabetes, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Nationally, studies estimate obesity-related medical costs reach roughly $147 billion annually, or about 9 to 10% of the total U.S. health spending, according to CDC data. In Vermont, Medicaid covered nearly 195,000 people in 2024. These health outcomes, combined with the well-documented impact of postprandial sugar crashes on attention and mood, have prompted some researchers to question whether SNAP's current design promotes not just food security, but also long-term self-sufficiency. Steps toward change. In 2025, Arkansas and Indiana received USDA waivers to ban SNAP purchases of soda, candy, and other junk foods. Ladies and gentlemen, do you support that? I think I definitely do. If we want to help people who need the help, excuse me, why not give them the best possible help that we know we can do? Proponents say such restrictions could shift spending toward nutrient-rich options and reduce diet-related health burdens. Vermont has not applied for similar waivers. Anti-hunger organizations warn that restrictions could stigmatize recipients or create logistical challenges for retailers. I don't know what logistical challenges there would be for retailers, because most of SNAP users have a card that looks like a credit card or a debit card, and a simple programming change could probably prohibit the sale of items that are simply not healthy for the recipient. Meanwhile, initiatives like Vermont's Crop Cash program, which doubles SNAP dollars spent on fruits and vegetables at farm markets, represent smaller scale efforts to encourage healthier choices. So we have made a couple of steps in the right direction, but as the author says, they're smaller scale efforts currently. The science is clear. A diet high in refined carbohydrates and sugar can leave people fatigued, foggy, and less productive. For Vermont's 65,000 SNAP recipients, the current system may unintentionally reinforce these cycles. With $155 million spent annually, policymakers face a difficult decision. Should SNAP remain focused on calories alone, or should it evolve to prioritize nutrition and help families break free of a diet that undermines energy and long-term health? I think that question answers itself. If we are looking for the best possible outcome, then we need to be promoting the most healthy diet for people that we want to help. Experts say breaking entrenched dietary habits isn't easy. Decades of cheap, highly processed foods and aggressive marketing have normalized a cycle of sugar highs and energy crashes. Nutrition education programs like Vermont Veggies Van Go aim to teach healthier choices, and initiatives like Crop Cash double SNAP dollars for fresh produce. But these programs remain small next to SNAP's scale. Could stricter purchase guidelines, expanded education, or incentives for whole foods shift habits? For now, the question remains open. I think it would. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, in a state where we have a budget that is north of $9 billion, and we are looking to get the most bang for our buck, I think the question answers itself. If we are going to have an assistance program where the taxpayers who can afford to pay the taxes are helping people in need, then we need to make the decision that the diet that is afforded people on these programs is the healthiest that we can provide. And I think that's the most humane, and it's hard to argue against that type of explanation or scenario. The idea that it is a stigma for someone not to be able to buy healthy food doesn't fly with me, and I hope most of you in the listening audience would agree. If you're going to be getting an assistance program, it will be designed to keep you healthy, keep you productive, not produce some sort of a foggy brain so that you can't pay attention, especially in school, when the idea is to graduate someone who can either prosper in a trade or in college or university so that they can be self-sufficient in their lives as quickly as possible. So this, to me, ladies and gentlemen, is a no-brainer. Like the article says, $155 million. Taxpayer money. Whether it's federal money, state money, or a combination of the two, it doesn't really matter. It's taxpayer money. If that SNAP card is someone else's money, then someone else's money must be spent in the most effective, most efficient way to help the person getting the assistance to be the most prosperous. And I hope my explanation is not falling on deaf ears. I seriously think it's not. But the idea of a stigma because we as a state want people we're trying to help to be the most healthy and the most productive is just not a good argument. It's seriously not a good argument. Looking someone in the eye and saying, We want you to be as healthy as you can be. We want you to be able to learn as much as possible, to be as sharp as you can in the classroom, so that you can get the best grades, so that you can get a better job, or get into the college of your choice, a better college, to get a better job when you leave. It all makes sense to me, and I hope it makes sense to you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. You're listening to Right Side Up.
New Hampshire Republican Governor Kelly Ayotte has been making a lot of noise about how she's funding education. The Republican budget she just signed provides more money for education than ever before. She even bragged the other day that New Hampshire is top 10 in the country when it comes to funding our children's education, as if giving money to school systems has anything to do with learning. If you look at the math, and if you got schooled in New Hampshire, the odds are good it's not your best subject. It's the exact opposite. The more money we throw at schools, the less kids learn. We're committed to wasting money on an experiment that failed, unless wasting money to drive parents to homeschool their kids was the goal. We prefer to pick on Democrats, lower-hanging fruit and all that, but our rhetorical woodshed doesn't discriminate. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you.
Oh, the last two segments we talked about a lot of money being spent in the state, by the state. Taxpayer money should be, hopefully, money well spent, wisely spent. Let's hope that that's the case for both situations, because, like I said, with a $9+ billion budget for a small state of less than 1 million people in population, we better be very diligent when it comes to taxpayer dollars. We want to keep our residents, not chase them away, right? Before I get into our next article, I want to remind our listeners, if you need to or have the desire to, drop us a line, rightsiteupradio@gmail.com. If for some reason you can't listen to us on the radio and you prefer to in podcast form or on the web, you can go to WNTK.com. You can find the podcast button, click on it, and if you scroll down, you'll be able to find Right Side Up and any number of our shows. Hope you enjoy them. If you enjoy them enough, please, by all means, send one or two to a friend. We'd love to expand our audience. We have expanded it quite a bit, but we're always looking to get the message out to more and more people. You can find us also on granitrock.com. You can find us on 802 Scoop YouTube. You can find us on 802 Scoop Facebook. You can also find us, where else? On Podbean. And I think I've covered all of it. And like I said, soon you will be able to find us on another venue. I just haven't finalized that, but there will be one more venue that you'll be able to find us on. So I wanted to get into this other article. I know this in the very recent past, this has become an issue for Vermonters, and maybe some of you who are not Vermonters. I had some texts and some emails about this, and I wanted to let some time go by because I knew the more time that went by, the more facts on the ground would actually come out, and I'm glad I waited a little bit. This is also, if you want to find the article, you can find it on FYIVT.com. This is Dave Sulia's site. No farms, steeples, or heritage allowed in the Vermont 250 logo. When Vermont unveiled its official logo for the state's 250th anniversary earlier this year, public reaction ranged from puzzled to politely underwhelmed. But behind the minimalist design lies a more troubling story. Key visual elements were banned: church steeples, red, white, and blue, farms, barns, even recognizable Vermont mountains, and there's no public record showing anyone ever approved those restrictions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I chose Vermont as my home because of the heritage of Vermont. Vermont is a heritage of a population that is fiercely independent, fiercely self-sufficient. And I have seen some of the renditions or the artwork that was overlooked. Let's call it overlooked or discarded. And it is a much better example of Vermont as it was. It shows, a lot of the artwork shows pastures, pastoral views, the shape of the state of Vermont. None of the nonsense that actually was approved for the artwork. Let me get back to this article. FYI, VT set out to find the 4 remaining logo finalists mentioned in our prior article. We found them, 6 in total, contained within a design presentation by Place Creative Company. That's when we noticed something else, a slide titled, quote, "What to Embrace / What to Avoid," end quote. It appeared to lay out strict branding boundaries, and it excluded nearly every icon Vermonters associate with their history. This is very troubling. What began as a logo investigation quickly became a broader inquiry into transparency, authorship, and decision-making at the heart of Vermont's semi-quincentennial branding. Let's see. What to avoid. The rules that shaped the logo. According to Place Creative's official listening session summary, the firm developed the Embrace / Avoid list based on 2 January 2024 listening sessions and a 112 response online survey. Here's what they said to avoid. No church steeples, no identifiable mountains, no farms or barns, no specific people, historic or modern, no red, white, and blue. Sounds very anti-American and very anti-Vermont, if you ask me. Let's see, what to embrace. According to the same list, shapes, abstractions, symbols, the shape of Vermont, and Vermont 250th anniversary, quote, in the phrase, in quotes. But there's a catch. The listening session report makes clear that while the survey showed respondents favoring Vermont's geography, farms, forests, and history, the handful of attendees at the closed-door listening sessions voiced concern that such imagery was overused or not inclusive. It was those curated voices, not the survey majority, that became the guiding influence. The visual identity guidelines, no steeples, no red, white, and blue, no specific people, reflect a broader design philosophy rooted in what's often called postmodernism. Rather than depict literal history or familiar Vermont icons, the designers favored abstract symbols, emotional tone, and what they described as universal themes. Universal is in quotes here. The result is a commemorative logo that looks less like Vermont and more like a corporate rebrand. What is postmodern design? Postmodernism is in design rejects literal depictions of history, people, or place. Instead, it favors abstraction, emotional ambiguity, and symbolism. Critics say it often strips away local meaning in the name of inclusivity and modernity. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know a ton of the history of Vermont, but I do know that Vermont has been inclusive for the entirety of its history. Vermont has not been an exclusive state in any way, shape, or form. Oh, let's see. Manufactured consensus. In video transcripts of the logo presentation, Place Creative staff acknowledged that the quote, full report and survey results were approved by the marketing committee, end quote. But there is no vote in any minutes confirming that action, and it appears to refer only to a subset of members, likely no more than two to four people. A key admission appears in the presentation transcript. Quote, we wanted to avoid symbols that might feel exclusionary to some, like red, white, and blue. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to break from this for a minute. Red, white, and blue, symbols to the world, and probably any aliens who might have slid by in their supersonic or hypersonic vehicle while they locked their doors because our world has gone crazy, and said, that is the most inclusive nation in the world. How do we know? Because millions upon millions have crossed our borders, both legally and illegally, to live the American dream. Okay, now that I'm going to get off my soapbox and finish reading the article here. We wanted to avoid symbols that might feel exclusionary to some, like red, white, and blue. Instead of grounding it in any one town or one story, we abstracted it to make it universal, end quote. Well, there are a lot of people who are not happy with the abstraction. While 112 Vermonters filled out the official public survey, the final branding rules were based on input from just 24 people, mostly state insiders, participating in two closed-door, quote, listening sessions, end quote, led by the design firm itself. Their interpretation, not the public's, dictated what Vermont's 250th could and couldn't look like. Now, in the article, if you go online, you'll be able to see he's got a list of attendees. And at the bottom of the list, he shows and he highlights with an arrow and a red circle, this report is to be held in strict confidence. That's troubling, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Let's see. In short, the design team interpreted a narrow subset of stakeholder input as justification to override majority sentiment. And no one in the full committee appears to have challenged them. No record of approval. FYI, VT reviewed every 2024 meeting agenda and set of minutes from the Vermont 250th committee, its advisory and marketing committees, and relevant working groups. Nowhere in those records is there a vote, motion, or even discussion affirming Place Creative's embrace/avoid rules as official. The rules first appear in Place's February 16, 2024 presentation to the full committee. That meeting contains no record of debate or objection, only a brief comment from historian Tom Hughes, who expressed concern that the materials made, quote, no mention of the Green Mountain Boys, end quote, or foundational figures. No action was taken on his comment. From there, the rules simply became canon. When 6 logo options were presented weeks later, each one had already followed the unvoted restrictions. By March 27, the committee voted to adopt Concept 1 without ever voting on the rules that eliminated traditional Vermont symbolism from every choice. And the article also includes committee members and their roles, and commissioners and their affiliations. It's a pretty detailed article. I don't think I'm going to get through the whole thing. But the next is, as part of our reporting, we reached out to committee members, state officials, and stakeholders for comment. Most have not returned voicemails or emails. One exception, the governor's office's spokesperson told FYIVT that Governor Scott's involvement was limited to creating the commission. He had no review role in the branding process and has, quote, has not seen or approved, end quote, the logo materials prior to their release. Meanwhile, everyday Vermonters have taken note of what's missing. No barns. What? No barns? That's not Vermont, said Perry Thomas of the now closed Thomas Dairy, which operated in Rutland from 1920 to 2020. Veteran journalist Guy Page, Vermont Daily Chronicle, offered a historical perspective. Quote, it baffles me that church steeples were explicitly excluded from the logo. Some of our most iconic scenes feature steeples, like the Unitarian Universalist Church on Church Street and the Cambridge United Church in the Alden Bryant painting behind the governor's press podium. Vermont now, and for the last 250 years, has been a state built around small towns, every one of which has a church serving as a community center. And finally, Vermont was the site of intense revivals in the 19th century. The two founders of the Mormon faith, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, were born here. Not what Vermont is, but what it could become. Place Creative's listening session report explains that the design identity was meant to be not dated, not overly patriotic, not overly literal, and to reflect what Vermont could become. Let me say that again. Not overly literal and to reflect, quote, what Vermont could become, end quote. But this future-facing ideology stands in sharp contrast to Vermont's 250th, an event rooted in honoring the past. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot more in this article. I encourage you to read it. It's on FYIVT.com, Dave Sulia's site. We've come to the end of the show again, but I really want to thank all of our listeners. I hope you find this informative. I hope I give you enough information to make you want and go dig deeper and find more answers. But we still enjoy doing this. We still love it being able to inform you. So remember, stay safe, stay informed, listen to Right Side Up.